Hey there, Suzi here. Before we get into today's episode, I want to share this special message with you. Now, my co-host Michelle and I love masterminds. Not only do we belong to masterminds, but we also host a mastermind. We started it almost 8 years ago, and it is the premier mastermind for women business owners who want to grow their business with a specific focus on marketing. Now, this group is usually completely booked out, and very occasionally we open the doors and invite a handful of women in. So if you're growing your business, but you're struggling with feeling overwhelmed, or like you constantly have a split focus when it comes to your marketing, this could be exactly what you're looking for. We have an amazing time together, and the women in the group are extraordinary. They're great cheerleaders, supporters, advisors, and colleagues for you. And they're also seeing extraordinary results. We see people cracking the $1 million, $2 million, $3 million mark, launching new e-commerce sites that go from $0 to $10,000 a month in sales. They're doubling their conversion rates, they're growing memberships, they're selling courses, they're growing their personal brands, and they're getting all kinds of media exposure and speaking opportunities and so much more. You can learn more about the mastermind and join the wait list over at herbusinessmastermind.com. We're going to open the doors soon, so you definitely want to be on the list to get an invitation. So head on over to herbusinessmastermind.com. Hi, you're listening to the Content Sells Podcast, the show all about how to create content to attract, convert, and keep your ideal clients. Welcome to episode 215. I'm Suzi Dafnis, and here with me is my co-host. Hey, Michelle, how are you?
Hey, Suzi Dafnis. I am doing really, really well. As we record this episode, we're both just back from spending a little wonderful time together in person. And while virtual is great, and I do love catching up with you virtually, and I love all the things virtual gives us in terms of staying connected, gee, it's good to get together in real life.
It is, and it really, really was. And I loved seeing your gorgeous face and being able to give you a hug. And I just think there's, I love all the online, of course. And look at us here. We're in different parts of the country and we're recording this episode, but I love a good in real life experience as well. So we spent some time on Sydney Harbour, one of my favourite places to be, and one of my favourite places to share with friends is to go out on this gorgeous harbour that we have. But today's not about harbours or boats or in real life anything. Today's about online workshops, and specifically the really cool strategy of offering a paid low-cost workshop to your audience and where that might fit into your marketing mix.
Yes, this can be an awesome strategy and unlock a ton of benefits inside of your business when you do a low-cost workshop. And that can be for a bunch of reasons, including as a way to dip your toe into the water when first putting your ideas out there in a you decide you want to do this one-to-many format instead of maybe doing stuff one-to-one. You want to say, hey, how do I put something together where I can do it once and reach a lot of people at that, with that one activity? So perhaps you're a coach or a consultant or an expert in something, and you've typically been selling that expertise to clients on a one-to-one basis, and you're exploring what or how you might package up that expertise into a course or perhaps something even bigger. Doing a small, low-cost workshop can be a great testing ground.
Definitely. And another reason that you might want to consider offering a low-price workshop is as a stepping stone to some of your higher-price services or courses or products. And that's really going to be the focus of the strategy that we're talking about today in this particular episode. So, for example, let's say you have a flagship course that's $1,000 or $2,000 or whatever it is. To get someone to make that purchase as their first purchase with you can take a little bit of time, and you likely need to do some kind of heavy lifting when it comes to the sales process. Either with a product launch of some kind where you might offer a bunch of free content and build up a lot of buzz, like what Jeff Walker teaches in his product launch formula. And we have an episode that we recorded with Jeff where you can learn more about that, and we'll include a link to that in today's show notes. And following the launch framework, you then open up the doors on your course at the peak moment when you've got the most attention of your market, and you just give them something really valuable for free. They've got all this value. The reciprocity is really high. And that means that you can sell something in that higher price point off the back of that. Or you might instead go with a more high-touch sales process where you or your sales team, if you have one, actually conduct one-on-one conversations with people to help them make the decision to move forward with you. By offering this low-dollar paid workshop as a step before your higher price program or services, you can typically take the heavy lifting down several notches, because it's much easier to get someone to pay you, say, $30 or even $100. And then during that paid workshop, you add a great amount of value and you make an offer for them to move forward with you to your next step.
Right. There can be so many advantages to this low-cost workshop strategy. And the first of those is the show-up rate. So you'll often see a much higher show-up rate for a paid workshop. That is the number of people actually turning up. So if you've been running free webinars or free workshops or other free kind of live content where you invite people to come along, you'll know that the percentage of people who actually show up for your live webinar or your live training is often as low as 25% of those who register to attend when what you're offering is free. So you can do all this work to get 200 people, say, to register, but it's very possible, even after you've done the hard yakka of sending out reminder emails and text messages, to have just 50 of those people actually turn up. And this is, one of the perils of free content. It used to be many years ago, Suzi, when you and I were both giving away free content, you'd send out an email and, you'd have 500 people sign up for your free webinar and 499 of them turn up. But that doesn't happen so much these days. But when someone has paid you to attend, even when it's a small amount, their tendency to show up is much greater. And you can start to see 70%, 80%, even 90% plus show up rates when you move from doing a free webinar to a paid workshop. And I mean, these are numbers that I haven't seen since like the early 2000s for free stuff. And so when you combine that massively higher show up rate with the next benefit, and we're talking about unlocking the benefits of low cost workshops here. When you can combine this higher show up rate with this next benefit, you get this kind of double whammy boost. And that next benefit is that in addition to more people showing up, you can typically get a higher conversion rate on a paid workshop, even when the amount they're paying is, $25, $30 to be there. Because you're already talking to people who are proven buyers. That is, they're serious enough about learning what it is you have to teach them that they'll part with some cash, some cold, hard cash to do so. So you have a much lower percentage of tire kickers and a much higher percentage of motivated people on your workshop in the first place to sort of see your presentation. And I've typically seen that people stay on the workshop to the end as well when they've paid to be there, versus when you're offering free types of trainings like free webinars, many people will leave early because it's free and they're less committed. And so they often will miss out on seeing your offer at the end. And maybe you've watched this yourself. You've kind of seen you've got 100 people on your webinar and you start switching to the offer and they all start leaving in droves. That tends to happen less when you have a paid workshop. So when you have a paid workshop with a greater percentage of people showing up and then a greater percentage of people staying to the end, when you do make your offer, and we still suggest you make an offer on a paid workshop, we'll tell you more about that later, you can see much, much higher conversion rates. That is the number of people buying the thing you're offering on that paid workshop. And you know what? It's not out of the question. I've seen this firsthand on projects that I've worked on, to double your conversion rates that you were getting on a webinar on your paid workshop.
That's very exciting. So what that means is that even if you get a small number of people paying to be on your workshop than you might if you offered it for free, you can very often still get more people taking the next step with you from the paid workshop for all the reasons that we've just mentioned. And we've seen this for sure. So if you currently do free webinars to then sell into your next offer, you might consider testing out a paid low-cost workshop to see how it compares. And another benefit of this approach is that you can also use the money that you're being paid for the workshop to fund your advertising costs. So you can start to grow your email list by investing in paid traffic on platforms like Facebook or Instagram or YouTube or LinkedIn, and get an immediate return as people buy your low-cost workshop right away, versus having to wait for high dollar sales down the line. So even if the workshop sales simply cover your ad costs, which would be a great result, or they cover a good portion of them, it's a real plus, because even though you don't make a profit right away on the workshop, it's what you offer on the workshop that starts to generate your profit. So if you can get people onto the workshop, even at a break-even rate, which means what it's costing you is what they're getting. Let me give you an example. So if it's costing you $30 to get someone to sign up for your paid workshop, that's how much it's costing you for that lead, and you're actually charging $30, you're essentially getting those high-quality leads. Remember, these are people who are buyers. They've already opened up their credit card. You're getting them for free. Now, even if it's costing you a little more than that, so let's say it costs you $60 to get a workshop subscriber and you're charging $30 for the workshop, you're still offsetting the cost of those leads by $30, and you have the chance to make more sales on the workshop. So you want to contrast that with offering a free workshop, and you've paid all this money to get those leads, but you're not offsetting that cost. So this idea is that the first thing you sell is a lower dollar something that covers or partly covers your lead acquisition costs. This is often referred to as an SLO, a self-liquidating offer. And we did a great episode all about self-liquidating offers with the wonderful Brandy Miles, and we'll include a link to that episode in our show notes, because that takes you a little further into that idea if you want to learn more about that strategy.
I love that strategy, and I love this paid low-cost workshop strategy for all those reasons, especially because what you were saying, Suzi, you're able to grow your list and invest in paid traffic and get that immediate return. Even from those who don't go on to buy your higher dollar offers, you're kind of triggering that immediate return on the cost of acquiring those leads. So hopefully we've given you enough reasons to perk your ears up and hear us out when it comes to this strategy. And let's give you a few more pointers and recommendations. If you're sitting there going, interesting, I wouldn't mind adding this to the mix. The first thing we wanted to talk to you about is the price point. Now, you want to keep the price deliberately low. This episode is called Unlocking the Benefits of Low-Cost Workshops. So what do we mean by that? What are we calling low cost? Well, in that $20 to $30 price point is the price point that I really like, because while it's a commitment, it's also not a huge commitment. And this is important for a few reasons. One, that $20 to $30 is low enough that you can get people to buy without having to do a lot of heavy lifting to get them to say yes to you. So people will buy maybe from an email sequence going to a simple sales page. You know, it's around the price of a movie ticket, so it's not seen as a high-risk investment. But at the same time, it's seen as something of value. I would value something I paid $20 to $30 for. I value my $20 or $30. I'm not just throwing them out in the street. I'm not, like in those old movies, people used to light their cigars with a $100 bill, with a $20 bill. So we have some value around that. There's a bit of skin in the game if I've paid you $20 or $30 to be there, but not too much. Because remember, you want to get a good volume of people onto this paid workshop, because this is the front end of your funnel. You're still aiming to get good numbers of people signing up, so you can then make an offer for that higher dollar something that Suzi was referring to earlier. So that's the first reason I think that $20 to $30 price point is good. The other reason is that it's high enough that people don't want to waste their money. And that's what helps with the show up rate and the stick rate. So it's low enough that I'll pay you that without having to get too much convincing, but it's high enough that I'm going to show up. I'm going to get value out of that money. And that's what gets us that higher percentage of people turning up live and staying on to the end. So that's the second reason. The third reason why I think this price point really works is kind of one that you don't realize right away, but it is the gift that keeps on giving to you later. It's kind of, for me, the real crux of why this whole strategy works. And that is that $20 to $30 is not so high that somebody's going to object to you making an offer at the end of your workshop. So if you advertise your workshop and you advertise it for a set duration, we'll talk about duration a bit later, and then you use some time at the end of that workshop to make an offer for the next step. If I've paid you $1,000 million billion to be there, probably going to object to you using that time to make an offer. But if I've paid $20 or $30, it's pretty easy for you to give me $20 or $30 worth of value in the time. And then I feel great. I've got really great value from this. And now I'm ready and willing to hear what the next step is. So we'll chat in a minute about timing and how you can add value. But the basic idea is that you want to deliver a good amount of value and then transition to making your offer. Now, if you make your workshop $200, people start to have higher expectations about what you will deliver on that workshop. So you've got to do a lot more work to satisfy them on the workshop. And they can be upset when you use part of their time on the workshop they've paid for to make an offer. Whereas I've found it's easy to over-deliver on people's expectations of a $20 or $30 workshop and have people feeling really good about then staying on to hear what their next step could be, because there's still so many next things they need support with. When you've solved their $20 or $30 problem, it opens the door on lots more things they want your help with. And Suzi, speaking of price points, you've really done a whole bunch of different things with price points at different offers and at, for different strategies. You've been great at testing this. Kind of keen to hear your views on this.
One of the things I want to say is that while we might be pricing it at $20 or $30, back to Michelle's point, we're going to be over-delivering. So even in the way that we describe what we're giving them in that workshop, we're going to be positioning that at a much higher value. So the $20 or $30 is such a total no-brainer for what they're getting. And we have tried a few different price points. We did start off, I think the first one we did was at $10. We ran actually a week-long workshop called the Find Your Focus 5-Day Challenge. And so that brought in some revenue on the front end, which offset ads, but we also offered a VIP experience as an upsell, which added another $49 to that transaction. And so it was kind of a double whammy. We won't talk too much about that upsell strategy, but $10 was the basic fee. But some people end up paying, $59 when they took the VIP experience. And the reason that we're often doing our paid workshops is to introduce people to the Her Business Network. So that was one of them. That was $10. And then 2 weeks ago, we ran a new workshop called the Business Breakthrough Crash Course, and that was $27. And it was still ridiculously low cost for a ton of value. And then during the workshop, we opened up the doors to the Her Business Network, and 42% of those who signed up for the workshop joined membership. So to Michelle's point of conversions, we've never seen that sort of conversion on a free workshop or a free webinar. And so whether they're paying 10 or 27 or 59, we're giving them so much value that we're seeing those great conversion rates. And those conversion rates have ranged from 36% to 42%, which are both really, really great. So the game with those workshops is that once you know that you have an offer that converts, is to get as many people as possible doing your low-cost workshop. And to the point we made earlier, we used to get possibly 2x, 3x as many people when we did a free workshop, but then we had to contend with the show-up rate and then the conversion rate. Whereas this way, I don't mind so much if we don't get a squazillion people in, because I know that these people are willing to put some money down, not a huge amount. We give them tons and tons of value. So I would start somewhere. And so if that for you is $10 or $5, you need to keep in mind your audience. Like ours is a business audience. So if someone's going to invest in their business, putting $10 or $27 down, it's a nothing, but if yours is a different market, you might want to try some different points. Some ways, to your point of view just made, I'm tempted to charge more because I think we might get an even different type of client who would convert even better. But right now I'm really happy with that $27 price point.
I definitely think it's something you can play with. I think the real gist of it is for the customer, it needs to kind of waver on that line that we were talking about earlier. It's enough that I'm going to want to show up. I don't want to waste my money, but it's also a really easy thing for me to put that money down. I don't need to be, jump through 50 bells and whistles to be convinced to pay that money. So finding what that range is for you and your audience can take some testing. And Suzi, I love the experimentation you've been doing. And I think if you're wondering where to start, I would just start at that $20 mark. I think it's a good kind of middle ground, and then you can always kind of test lower ground, you can test higher ground, but it's got to just feel like kind of a no-brainer, and that there's going to get so much more value from the workshop.
I want to talk about the format of the workshop, because I suggest that you start with a one-off workshop, not a week-long project like we've done. We've been doing this for quite a while, and we have a method in our madness. The first thing we'll say is that it does need to be different to a typical salesy kind of webinar where you might deliver 45 or 60 minutes of valuable content, and then you move into 30 minutes talking about your offer. And you can experiment with the durations and the formats that work for you, but a good place to start is thinking about your workshop as being more of a workshop, like a 2.5 to 3 hour mark, where you deliver content for the first 90 minutes or even the first 2 hours, and then you move into your offer. That way you've really delivered. It's also called a workshop because you're workshopping, and we'll talk more about that. But this way you've really delivered a lot of value and fulfilled the workshop format before you transition to your offer.
Yeah, and you really want to think about this as a teaching workshop. So I know even on a webinar, we are all trying to add value, and you do teach something, but it's very much you kind of owning the room and talking to your audience when you do a free webinar. You know, you've kind of got them there. You kind of like, you want to keep up the energy. You don't want people to leave because, you know, you've got a fairly tenuous connection. It's a free webinar. People could leave at any time. You're grateful that they showed up, you know, and you want to put on a good show. You want to get straight to, you know, compelling them to stay with you. And so you don't loosen the reins really very much on you as the presenter, high energy, delivering value, keeping the whole thing moving along. And while you might offer some interaction and some engagement on a webinar, you know, hey, everybody, tell us where you're from. And we talk about this a bit in some episodes we've got on webinar best practices, which we'll give you the links to shortly. You do want that level of interaction and engagement. It's very much you as the lecturer, if you like, sharing your information to the class, if we want to kind of go with that metaphor. And because you're also on a bit of a time limit, you're also a little limited with what you can share. You've really got to do a lot of heavy lifting in those first 60, minutes or so that you have to establish your authority, to build your rapport, to deliver some valuable content so that people are then ready to hear your sales message. And the expectation of your audience who's used to attending a lot of these free webinars, I mean, we've got a more sophisticated audience than we've ever had, is that they're sitting in on the equivalent of a lecture at a university. You know, you've explained that in this webinar, I'm going to teach you this, I'm going to show you that, you're going to get this. And so they're kind of arriving there ready to receive. Whereas a workshop, like Suzi intimated, you're calling it a workshop. You're setting up the expectation that people are going to arrive and have a bit more of a workshop experience. Maybe that it's not out of the ordinary that they would expect. They might do a couple of exercises or step into some action in some way, and that you'll likely go deeper into the content than you would on a free webinar. So if the free webinar, if you're doing those right now, or you're thinking about doing those, or you've attended those, if you think about those as like the uni lecture, the university lecture, then the workshop is more like that hands-on tutorial. So you want to think about including some basic exercises that people can do real time. I'm not saying you go and send them off for 20 minutes to do it. You want to keep them with you, but that's something they maybe can do real time while they're with you. And you might also consider having a simple workbook or a resource, like maybe a fillable PDF. And so you can say, now, like just while we're sitting here, you might teach them 10 ways to brainstorm their podcast topic, for example. Now, just while we're talking about, maybe just jot down a couple of ideas for you in the space here in the worksheet. What might be some good podcast ideas for you? And then you might even say, hey, and if you've got one you really like, post it into the chat. And then you might read out a few of those podcast titles. And then you might give a little bit of real-time feedback on those podcast titles. So you can see how you're just giving people that little bit more depth, that little bit more tuition and interactive kind of teaching, training experience on the workshop. Not too much. We'll talk about that as well.
I have to say that is my favorite way to teach. Where people are doing exercises.
I love it.
And actually implementing what it is they're learning. So to pick up on that, Whereas your webinar might be more about teaching people the what and why of your topic, your free webinar. For example, if you teach people how to have difficult conversations with their team members, maybe your webinar teaching component might touch on what the challenges and mistakes are when it comes to difficult conversations and what your special power talk framework might be. The 5 parts of the framework and why it helps people to have more productive, respectful, difficult conversations. But you don't get into the nitty-gritty of how to implement the framework. That's what's covered in your next paid step if you're doing a free webinar. But when you do a longer, paid, low-cost workshop, you still cover the what and the why like you would on the free webinar, but you also step a little more into the how, like Michelle was just talking about. So you might show how to do one specific part of your 5-part process. So let's say the first step in the 5-part power talk framework for difficult conversations was to create safety. Then you might actually go into a bit of a how on that and build a short, easy to complete exercise that people can do live on the workshop. And this exercise could be something that they fill out on in one of those downloadable PDFs that Michelle mentioned. They still don't have the how of the whole process, so don't worry that you're giving too much away. They still don't have the how of the whole process, but they've got a taste of what it's like to learn from you, and they've experienced some great value and got some practical, tactical things that they can use in their next difficult conversation, even if they don't have the whole picture. And they have this open loop. That means like there's a gap now. They know there's 4 other steps. So how do they get those other steps? And that provides a really great segue for you into the next part of your workshop. And that's the transition to your offer. So let me share an example. You could say, you've now learned what the 5-part Power Talk framework is, why it matters, and what some of the big mistakes are that you need to avoid. And you know how to create safety for the person you're talking to, which is the first crucial step in this process. This has set you up to have a much better outcome for your next difficult conversation. And so now you've got the option to go ahead and take what you've learned and implement this on your own, or you can come join me at my Difficult Conversations Masterclass, where I'll walk you step by step through all 5 parts of the framework and give you my exact scripts and templates, plus give you real-time feedback and role plays where you can practice your scripts and responses, as well as 24/7 support in our private members group, so that you can build confidence and competence and feel equipped to handle any difficult conversation that comes your way, creating win-win outcomes without feeling stressed and without creating friction in your team. Can you hear that? How it's moving people to that next step? And then you can go into the rest of your offer. And we cover all the elements of a successful offer in episode number 23, which is called How to Craft an Offer That Sells. And if you like the sound of what you just heard, then you're going to get the rest of that when we give you a link to that episode in our show notes. And I'll tell you where to find the show notes a little later on.
Suzi, you've touched on something I think really, which is where the main thinking needs to go into your workshop format. And that's that balance between, you want to deliver enough content that people feel like they got their money's worth, and you want to have delivered content that naturally opens the door on your next step. So definitely design your workshop with that next step in mind. You don't want to disconnect. You've got to the end of the workshop and now you've got to do all this paddling to kind of get people over to this other thing you want them to do next. You can see in that example Suzi just shared how she knew she wanted to get people into the Difficult Conversations Masterclass. There were these 5 parts to the process. She picked the first part that she knew she could deliver something that would be really interesting to people, that they could get an aha on right away, that she had an easy exercise they could do. They could sense what it would be like to work with her. We're just making this Difficult Conversations thing up, right? Like Suzi's not running that, but she could. She's got mastery in that area. But the point is that it really added the value. It really demonstrated the authority, and then it also opened the door on wanting more. And how am I going to get that? That's in the paid next step. And a great framework for thinking that process through is what we call the problem solution dance. And much like with the offers that sell, we have an entire episode devoted to helping you think that narrative through. And it really is kind of a narrative. You're telling a story all the way from, the ads that you show people, what you're saying on the opt-in pages, then what you say on the workshop, and how you then position your offer, that's a storyline. And then the natural kind of next step in the story, the next chapter, is the thing you want to sell next. So if you're interested in learning more about this problem solution dance, and really it is the heartbeat of any kind of campaign, not just a low-cost workshop campaign, you can find that in our archives. It's episode number 66, Turning Content into Sales with the Problem Solution Dance. And we're going to put a link to that in today's show notes for you as well. We've got a ton of episodes we're referring to today.
We do.
The other important thing you want to think about when it comes to the workshop is the replay. Now, there's 25,000 different strategies around recordings and replays, especially when it comes to webinars. But here's what I think is a really clear direction for you on the workshops. These are the paid workshops. You only want to make the replay available to those who have purchased the workshop. So don't run the workshop and then go back out and think, well, I want to try and get as many people as possible to hear my sales message, so I'm just going to send the replay to everyone. Because obviously that's disadvantaging those people who paid for that information. And you never want to do that, because that disincentivizes your buyers. You always want to be incentivizing your buyers, treating your buyers the best out of all the people in your list. So you want to only make the replay available to those who've purchased the workshop, and ideally only for a limited time. And you want to state this kind of right from the get-go, so they don't get lifetime access to the recording. Right. Again, when you're only charging $20, this feels reasonable. So if you do offer a recording or a replay, only make it available for as long as your promotion is running. This is an important point. So if the offer you make on your workshop, I've come to the workshop, the Difficult Conversations workshop Suzi was talking about, and I'm really interested in the Difficult Conversations Masterclass, she might say, and I'm making this special offer with these special bonuses available for the next 4 days. So let's say the offer is expiring on Sunday night. Then that's also the length of time your recording access is provided. It's going to also expire on Sunday night. Now, what might be the reason for that? Well, the reason is that you want people to feel like they need to take that next step with you, versus just feeling like they'll get around at some point in the future to watching that recording. Like maybe they turned up, but they want to watch the recording again, and they've got the recording forever, and they just think that's enough for me for now. They don't feel the tension around moving forward with you. Or perhaps they were one of the few people when you do a paid workshop strategy who couldn't be there for one reason or another, and they're thinking, I'll catch up on the recording. And maybe you've done this as well. I know I have. I've got all the best intentions I'm going to watch that recording, and I don't get back to it. And when you know really what you're selling will really help people, I feel that way about what I offer for sale. Suzi, I know you do. When you know that, then you want to give people the best chance to buy from you then and there. You don't want them feeling like they'll go and watch that recording that they're never going to watch, and then they're never going to help that you can get the help that you can give them. So you want to architect this process so that they think, oh, the recording's running out, I haven't watched it, or I've watched it, but I want to keep it forever, but I want what this person's going to help me with. And that little bit of tension can often be enough for them to move forward and buy from you, buy that next step from you, where you can help them so much more. So that's why I'd recommend you only show the recordings or the replays, whatever you're referring to them as, for the duration of your promotion.
So good. I hope that you might now be considering adding a paid workshop into the mix. I hope that we've helped you really unlock some of the benefits to these low-cost workshops. And Michelle, what would you say to people who might be considering adding this paid workshop to the mix? So say they already have a free webinar that they run. Do they do this as well as a free webinar or instead of the free webinar?
Yeah, it's such a good point, Suzi. And the short answer is the paid workshop is kind of a yes and. So what do I mean by that? Webinars are still great to have in the mix. We're not saying this needs to replace, webinars are dead and you've got to replace them with workshops. We're not saying that at all. It can actually work really well to do both. So I find if it works, I find that it works well if you have the time. And we suggest you do give yourself a good amount of time when you're running your campaign. You want to give yourself the best chance of getting as many people into your program or your product or your service as possible. So you want to give yourself a good runway when launching a campaign. And we've got a whole episode on this idea of the runway, and you'll find a link to that in our show notes for today, because I don't know if you're feeling this, if you're listening, but sometimes you're kind of kicking yourself because you think, oh, if I'd just had another week, or if I could just had one more webinar, or just done one more round of promotion, I think I could have really got much better results for this campaign. You really want to try and build that in so you're not kicking yourself so much. So you are giving yourself that space. So check out the runway episode in our show notes. We'll give you a link to that. But if you've given yourself enough of a lead time, it can work well to launch with your webinar, say in week 1, and then in week 2 of your promotion, do your workshop. It can be a great way to get a second bite at the cherry. So it gives you a reason to email people in week 1, come to the webinar, here's what we're going to cover. And then you can then, over a longer time frame, start talking about the workshop. So in week 1, you're talking about the webinar, you run the webinar, then you can pivot to talking about the workshop. And what happens is sometimes people come to the webinar and they don't buy, but they'll come back the second week to the workshop and buy. Or there's those people that sort of missed what you were saying about the webinar, or the webinar format doesn't interest them as much, but they're quite like the idea of a workshop, where they'll come along to the workshop and buy from you. So there'll be some people for whom the workshop is just a more appealing offer than the webinar, and vice versa. So it's great if you can do both. Having said that, though, and you'll know from previous episodes, the idea of do less and obsess, and don't take on too much at once. If you're new to both, that is, if you've never offered a free webinar and you've never offered a paid workshop, just start with one and get that up and running for your next campaign. And you can choose which one that is. They both have a place. And then if you feel you've got that dialed in, then consider adding the workshop or the webinar, whichever one you didn't start with first, to the mix in a future campaign.
Right. And if you haven't done a webinar, or you've done a webinar but you don't actually make an offer on the webinar, we have got, and this is one of our most popular ever episodes, and it's on this topic. It's episode 56, which is called Webinars That Sell. And once again, today's very rich show notes, we will make sure there's a link to that episode there for you as well. So that's what we have for you today. Here's what we want to ask. We'd so appreciate it if you enjoyed this episode, if you're taking away a couple of ideas, if you've been inspired to take some action, we would love it if you would leave a rating or a review on Apple Podcasts. We love sharing these tips with business owners. We've got amazing episodes planned for you for the next few months. Well, we kind of planned out a lot of this year. And there's an amazing guests, amazing episodes coming up. But my main point, went down a rabbit hole, is would you leave us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts? So we have over 100 5-star reviews, which I'm very proud to say, and I know Michelle is very proud of too. So I want to say thank you for listening today. If you get a moment and you would do that, leave us a rating or review, we would really appreciate it. One person who I want to give a quick shout out to is the lovely Chandra Morand of the Transit Lounge. She is actually our 2023 Member of the Year here at her business, and she works with Korean women who want to grow a side business to be a viable, profitable future full-time business, and she helps them do that through their private coaching and her online group program, which is called Women in Transit. And she's also a card-holding member of the wonderful Marketing Success Mastermind program that Michelle and I run. So she listened to episode 204. It was one called The Perils of Overthinking and Underdoing. And she said, I love this episode. So many great insights and tips as usual. So thank you, Chandra, for listening. Thank you for being a regular listener of the show. Thank you for leaving us a review. And be like Chandra. Leave us a rating or review. So anything we mentioned here on the show today, we're going to put over on our show notes page, as I mentioned. And so there's just, this is episode 215. There's nothing sort of lives in isolation when it comes to your content marketing. That's why over the years that we've been running this show, we keep building resources for you that work hand in hand. So yes, I want to do a longer cost workshop, but I don't know how to do it. Or I don't know how to identify the problem or the solution, or I don't really know my ideal client avatar. There's a wonderful resource, a wonderful library here for you. And we're going to curate some of those episodes and put them over on our website at herbusiness.com/low workshops, herbusiness.com/low workshops. Michelle, what do we have coming up in the next episode?
Actually, Susie, this one builds nicely on today. So we're talking about easy steps for optimizing your online sales process. So it's really like, how do you optimize your sales funnel? And a sales funnel is just a series of steps that you take people through. So a paid workshop, adding that into the mix, is you thinking through your online sales process, your sales funnel. Somebody comes to your workshop, you make an offer on the workshop. That's part of your sales funnel. So here's the thing. Many times when you launch a sales funnel, a sales process, people think, done. I've ticked that off the list. But getting your sales funnel live, getting that process that you're going to move people through is the start of the race. It is not the end of the race. So what do you need to focus on to make that process more effective? How can you avoid falling into the trap of thinking this doesn't work and then scrapping that and starting again, which is absolutely a ticket to just burnout and frustration and not making any money. Yeah. So what we're going to be talking about in the next episode are some things that we've learned over years and years and years of running really effective online sales processes, sales funnels that really do work and that turn into sales. We're going to give you our top tips for what to focus on and when in that sales process to go from ho-hum to, oh, yeah.
And here's the thing, whether you think you have a sales process or you don't, you do. If you are trying to get people to buy from you, then you're inviting them to do something. And so we're going to sort of put the spotlight on what is it that you could be doing to optimize that process of getting them into your world in the first place to actually having them buy from you. So that is coming up in the next episode. If you don't already subscribe to the show, be sure to hit that subscribe button because that means you'll get that episode as soon as it's available. That's coming up 2 weeks from the date of release of this episode. In the meantime, remember to go ahead and get all your resources over on our show notes page. And the details of that once more are herbusiness.com/low workshops. Michelle, anything you want to say before we go today?
Definitely, if it's calling to you, have a bit of an experiment with a low-cost workshop. It's working for so many of my clients, my colleagues, and across the board, they're seeing those massive show rates. They're seeing the big conversions. You know, Susie, your conversions are just incredible. And so all I would say is give it a go. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised.
Thank you. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next time right here on the Content Sales Podcast. Bye for now.